But yeah, importantly, we also, to acknowledge where I'm working from today, the land of the people of the Kulin Nations, and to stress as well that we acknowledge that this is land that was never ceded, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I want to stress as well a couple of points that Glenn's already made. So first of all, of course, we want to thank Glenn for inviting us, and thank you all for coming. It's great. I think we've got 30 or so in the room now, which is awesome. I think this is a good number to work through this kind of workshop. And I think the thing that I really want to stress is that this is a conversation. So I'll abuse my position as workshop leader a tiny bit and will present some information for the first 15 minutes or so, but mostly this is completely discussion. And the discussion is around and approaches and thinking around informing our efforts to change Australian drinking culture, and in particular how that impacts upon men, and perhaps even some of the questions will be whether we should do that. I think we're approaching this as a kind of, we know that there are problems, but we want to approach this critically as well. So I'm going to share my screen with you in a moment, and yeah, forgive me for doing this kind of information giving exercise at the beginning, but I'll try and whiz through the details of the piece of research that we finished last year. And this is basically to give a bit of context for the discussion and a bit of texture for the conversation that will follow. So I'm just going to share this now. If I do this, okay. So hopefully you can see the bright white, bright orange titles of masculinity and risky drinking practices in Victoria. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about this piece of research that we did last year, funded by VicHealth, and the team of people who are involved in that project and the subsequent data analysis. Some of them are in the room now. So Brittany Ralph is here with us as well, and Tristan Duncan, who continually work on the data and the storytelling that we're doing with this project. I did have another colleague, Carla Elliott, but I don't think she's here. But my colleagues will be here to help facilitate the discussion in the various breakout rooms as well. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about, if you've read this already, then forgive me for telling you old hat. But if you haven't, then what I'm going to do is just whiz through the kind of key headline, the key headline data and the key headline stories that come out of this piece of research that we did for VicHealth. So the framing for the study is that the kind of existing research shows that, as we're all probably familiar, that men outnumber women in most drinking categories used in research. So things like prevalence of consumption, frequency of drinking, intoxication, incidence of heavy drinking, all those kinds of things dominated by men. So that's kind of one angle. And the other kind of approach to the research is that we followed VicHealth's alcohol culture framework to focus on the way people drink, not just how much people drink. So, and this includes the formal rules, the social norms, the attitudes, and the beliefs around what is and what is not socially acceptable for a group of people to engage in terms of their drinking. So what this research was about was the kind of socially constructed beliefs, values and expectations around being a man and how this intersects with risky drinking. And before I kind of crack on, I guess there are two definitions that people in this drinking space tend to work with. And this research is primarily focused on, or primarily interested in, the official guidelines around single event risky drinking. So what we're talking about here, much to the shock of lots of people in my field for sure, is that we're talking about risky drinking is drinking more than 4 standard drinks in any one drinking session. And that's often a starting place for some raised eyebrows, but that's the official guidance. So yeah, this piece of research is, actually go on to the next slide, we'll be able to see. Yep, okay. So yeah, the piece of research aim to provide an in-depth understanding of men's drinking cultures in Victoria, and to look at a variety of what we described as social worlds, so a different variety of settings than is usually the case in existing research. And this might be in relation to sports clubs and different occupations and different places. And I'll explain a bit more in a moment as I get onto the next slide. what kind of social settings we used. But what's kind of crucial to quickly outline, this was not a large-scale quantitative piece of research. It's in fact a very qualitatively driven approach, and it comprises surveys with a group of people, but mostly focus groups and individual interviews. And we use this technique called the scroll back method, where we had people going through their social media traces to talk about, or to access specific drinking occasions, so they could tell us about actually what's happening at that event and in time, rather than just kind of reflecting or thinking in the abstract. So we did 40 of those interviews. We did 22 focus groups with men and 101 individual surveys. And the bulk of what I'm going to show you, 7 ethnographic observations as well, where we hung out and took notes in drinking venues that were identified by participants. The bulk of what I'm going to show you over the next 10 minutes, though, stems from the qualitative data from the focus groups, but not all of it. Okay. Just a little bit more detail on the sample. So yeah, there was 101 men aged between 19 and 72. So we had a full spectrum of ages represented in the research, but mostly around the kind of young adult terrain, which is 28 to 35, roughly, where we were had the majority of our participants. They were mostly white. They were mostly, not mostly, they were mostly white men, but actually in terms of their socioeconomic status, both in terms of education and occupation, this was really varied. So we had people from, not just across the regional and urban divide, but people across the kind of occupation and class divide within each of those regions as well. So the 22 focus groups, we had 6 groups of regional sports supporters, 5 groups of urban amateur sports players, 4 groups of amateur regional sports players, 4 groups of metro-based corporate workers, and 3 groups of metro-based hospitality workers. And we can come back to the details around those if you really want to know anything extra afterwards. But I guess the key point around thinking about social worlds, and one of the things that informed our analysis of this, is that it's important to remember that these men that belong to one particular social world, of course, as we all know, traverse different social worlds. So it's the social world is up for discussion, but these men might well be a hospo worker, but they might also be a sports player as well. But in terms of the focus group, they were talking about the groups of people that they hang out with in those specific settings that were part of the discussion. And before I get to that qualitative data, I just wanted to show you this quick snippet of the survey data. So what this points to is that among this sample of 101 men, risky drinking was absolutely ubiquitous, and it was regular. And nearly 2/3 of the men indicated that they engage in risky levels of drinking on a weekly basis, and 5 out of 6 did it monthly. And then even when we look at very heavy drinking, which is considered the level of 11 or more standard drinks in one session, this was less regular, but the majority of people did this at least monthly. So we have a high risky drinking group of people that informed that discussion. This kind of really stresses that point again. So it's a non-random sample, but it's a sample that drink kind of into the risky drinking threshold or above the risky drinking threshold much more than the general Australian population. And I guess that goes without saying, this is the kind of study that would generate that kind of sample, because that's what we're interested in. But yeah, it's a non-random sample, but I think what's of interest is that across the 5 social worlds that we looked at, even though we can't do anything with these stats really, it was interesting nonetheless that the participants from the 3 urban subgroups reported risky drinking at least once a month in general, and with other members of their group. And this was, this is high. And the other really high standout point was that the hospo workers in the sample all suggested that they drank 5 or more drinks monthly. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a moment. But it's just to give you a flavor of the kind of top level statistics, I suppose, the descriptive statistics. The key findings that I want to talk about as a framing for the conversation that comes next were, there are 3 key points that came out of our research. One, around the contestation of the meaning of risky drinking versus the government definitions and the official guidance. Secondly, and this might feel a bit intuitive, but I think it's interesting the way it's developed in the research. Secondly, that there's a centrality of alcohol to men's interactions and relationships with other men. And then thirdly, the emergence of autonomy rather than just peer pressure as being a really key idea and key competence in how we understand men's drinking cultures. So yeah, I'm just going to dip into the data a tiny bit to elaborate on each of these. And where possible, there's a few slides that speak to the kind of particularity of each social world, but I also really want to stress that there's a lot of overlaps in these things as well. So our first key finding then is around this, the definitions of risky drinking or men's understandings of risky drinking. And what constitutes risk in this context of drinking sessions. And the key point is it absolutely wildly differed from national guidelines. Again, there's an intuitive appeal here. I think many of us would guess this, but yeah, you know, drinking 5 or more, and in some cases drinking 11 or more was quite prevalent for our sample, but our sample didn't find this, or certainly didn't routinely find this to be risky. In fact, they thought the opposite. So one of the things that jumped out most was that, and this is a relatively common, it looks like it might be a kind of outlier, but this exchange on the slide is not uncommon at all in our data. Most participants suggested that risk for them starts somewhere between 10 to 30 drinks. This is, you know, big ticket item. And it's most extreme. Some people suggested there's no level of drinking that they consider risky, and there's a little bit of masculine kind of bravado that sometimes frames those discussions. But what we felt was, on reflecting on our data, was that was more about confusion. Actually, there's not very clear guidance. So people's understanding is something that needs to be developed. And in one of the, something that comes to mind, one of the focus groups that Brittany and I did together in a regional town, during the focus group, the 7 men drank 23 pints of lager between them in 90 minutes. So this thing was kind of like lived for us right there. So what do we want to make of that? So we will have more discussion about this momentarily, but what's clear here is that there's a significant gap between what health promoters understand to be risky drinking and the information or the understanding amongst the general public. And what becomes clear in the rest of our research is that there's a kind of disdain and distaste for paternalistic definitions of risk. And you can see in this quote that, well, what we think is that contextualized understandings of risk need to be factored into public health messaging. So there's this kind of like, what do those people in the ivory tower know about what's good for me? And there's a kind of distrust almost, and a disconnect between the average bloke and what people in our industry are trying to tell them. So a second major finding then in relation to the centrality of drinking to men's social interactions, it's probably widely known that men's friendships are activity-based, and that's replicated in our data. And drinking alcohol is this thing that facilitates sitting down and talking to friends as an acceptable activity among men. And there are variations in these sentiments across the sample, but again, it's shared in very significant ways. So I'm going to very briefly talk about each of these social worlds. So among hospitality workers, drinking during, after, and in some cases before a shift was considered a kind of standard part of the job, but a standard part and an important part of sociality, of connecting with colleagues and with other people in the bar. So there was this kind of stressing towards that it would be unusual to have an entirely sober team of bartenders, and that actually there was a sense that drinking fits nicely with the fast pace, with the highly social nature of their work, and even made them more confident and more effective in producing a kind of vibe that is necessary for the type of work that they engage in, and the venues, the vibe that the venues want. Going to corporate workers, this is slightly different. So now we're talking about corporate workers who still view drinking as important to their sociality, but it's a way of switching off from work. So it happens outside of work, of course, mostly. And despite the fact that a whole bunch of other activities were also mentioned among corporate workers as ways for men to connect, they felt those alternatives lacked the significance of what drinking can give you, but also the proximity of bars and pubs meant that drinking was the easiest and often the only option for these men to bond. And although they talked about things like they wouldn't judge someone if they came to Friday night drinks and didn't drink, what we see in this, in one of the quotes here from Mike, is that he's explaining that in the past he's found it difficult to connect and commiserate with co-workers when he wasn't drinking. And so in this way, and in many other ways actually, drinking was central to corporate workers' working lives as well as their social lives. The sports players, so as we can imagine, it's certainly a central element of their social world. Men's risky drinking practices, this happens a lot, and it happens largely depending on the season schedule. Again, intuitive appeal, but interesting and important to have men say this kind of stuff. In general, their drinking culture was described as an important tool for club bonding and for attracting new male and female players actually to the club. So whilst most players talked about staying away from drinking the night before a game, they talked about the significance of drinking immediately after a game. And risky drinking territory is very much there, but also in kind of seasonally in away weekends for footy trips and so on, where the heaviest drinking recorded is said to take place. An interesting aside to this as well is on the bottom part of the slide, where we found that sports clubs were relatively difficult points of entry. And I think this is part of a discussion that we might want to have afterwards as well, is that, and it's captured in a snippet from an email that we got from one club. And we want to stress that it's not just one club that feels like this, but there was a resistance to allowing researchers come in because of those tensions around maintaining good sports rating, maintaining reputation in the community, and also an acknowledgement that there was a tension between or around the fact that alcohol is a great source of revenue for clubs in these spaces. So it's difficult for clubs to allow researchers to come in and trouble the drinking culture in those spaces. Last one, I'm nearly finished, I promise. So the last one is sports supporters. If we move off field, we find that although sports supporters provided kind of varied accounts of drinking, a really key point was that watching the game at a pub or a mate's house lends itself to the greater possibility of heavier drinking. And there's an intuition here that comes to bear, because there are, when you go to a match to watch it live, there are longer queues at the bars, there's exorbitant prices and so on. So the young men, mostly young men in this kind of part of the research, and especially in regional spaces, we're talking about other ways to drink around the consumption of sport. And you can see, again, it's very, very heavy. An average Friday or Saturday night might involve between 6 and 20 beers and even drinking whole bottles of spirits and so on. So the last point is around this issue around autonomy. So one of the key things that emerged that's not as intuitive, I think this is counterintuitive for us, because we arrived at this research understanding that peer pressure plays a huge part around what men drink and how men drink. But for us, we saw that men stressed the need to avoid surrendering their autonomy. So peer pressure was the thing they kind of discursively denied. And we might want to question that, and I think we should. But our participants describe themselves more as not being those who peer pressure, but being more concerned with that one should maintain their own autonomy, but also that their friends should maintain their own autonomy. That it was the right thing to do for a man to be in control and self-determined and not be trying to impress their friends. And that, again, operated across the age spectrum. The reason that's important, and this is pretty much the last slide, is that we think that acts as a barrier to care practices. So as like one participant talked about how a female friend who got really drunk, he put her in an Uber and made sure she got home because she was too drunk and so on. But on that same night, he let a male friend in the same state get an Uber by himself because he felt more obliged to care for his female friends rather than actively and overtly care for his male friends. So the desire to respect the autonomy of other men and the possibility that, there is a possibility that not doing so, or that doing so incites an aggressive response or kind of some resistance, this acts as a barrier to providing health-related help and care for your friends. And it's not that they don't care. We know that the data really implied that men do care about their mates in drinking contexts. And many of them have developed these kind of stealth techniques of looking out for each other, making sure people drink water, making sure people go outside for a cigarette, making sure at times telling the bartender that their friends have had enough. So there are tensions here that we think we need to explore. And the only time when this came to be an absolute no-go, or the time when people decided they would absolutely step in, was around drink driving. So here, uniformly, the men talks about how, and it comes back to this issue around the individual being responsible for themselves, that when they get in a car and they've been drink driving, they put others at risk. So drinking is, men understand that other men should manage the risk for themselves, but when it comes to risking the lives of others, that they should step in and intervene and make sure their friends don't kind of engage in this practice that's really dangerous. I'm going to stop there because, as I said, this is just the framing of what's going to come next. And we're happy to take questions or talk through that more broadly. But really, I want to use as much of this session as possible to put some provocations to you. So I'm going to hand over to Tristan, who's going to explain the next part of the session, and we'll go from there.
Cool, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so now we're going to be setting up our activity. We'll be splitting up into breakout groups, and each of these groups is going to be allocated 3 statements. So over the course of the next 15 to 20 minutes, we'd like you to treat these statements as provocations and discussion points. So considering critically amongst yourselves, do you agree with these statements? Do you disagree with them? And if so, why? So as that kind of suggests, the intention isn't really to arrive at a consensus, but again, to think critically and kind of encourage a bit of rich debate around each of these points. At the end of that 15 to 20 minutes, we'll get one person. We'd like you to elect that person to share the summary of your discussion with the group before we move on to the next exercise. We'll be circulating, so myself, Brittany, and Steve, I believe, will be circulating around, popping into the groups, maybe facilitating a bit of discussion or sitting back as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So I believe we'll now turn it over.
Okay, so we've got about, taking out the production team, we've got about 32 people to allocate. So would 4 groups of 8 work?
Yeah, okay, that's fine. We've got 5 sets of questions if we can get to 5 groups. So we can go like 5, 6 or 7 might be.
I will go 6 or 7. That's
Yeah.
fine. We can do that. So what we'll do is in a minute, we're going to press a button and you will randomly end up in a smaller group of people. Okay. Facilitators, I think you're going to end up in a room as well. You might want to come back to the main room, facilitators, just so you can coordinate who goes into which room. And I'm just going to press a button and give us a minute to work this out. It's the first time we've done this. We'll work out how we do this, but even though you're going to be sitting in the same seat, you're going to end up in a different world. So just prepare for this bit of Zoom magic. You will start to disappear into smaller rooms in a moment. 5 rooms, here goes. Open all rooms. Okay. So room 1. So Tristan, we've got in room 2. So we'll move Bikram out, okay. Steve not joined, that's okay. Anne-Marie. So Brittany, shall I put you in room 1 for the first set of questions? Yeah, so.
Have I got the questions or am I taking them in with me?
Okay, shall I drop the questions that were sent around? Just a second.
I've got them, but no one's been given them, have they?
No, no one's been given them. It's for the facilitators to go in and take the questions. So if you set the first set,
yeah.
So I've just now got to work out, how do I move you, Zoom, into a room? Robin or Bikram, are you on?
I am on going.
So how do I move? I want to move Brittany into room 1.
Cool. So next to room 1, you should be able to click, and then I think it's then not so much join, but you should be able to. I think the people who are still in the room should be able to be there.
Well, the people already.
Cool.
Not sure. Next to my name, there's a little icon. You click that, it'll say assign.
I get to part of the room here. So,
thank you, Brittany. That was a better description than mine.
Lots of breakout rooms in lecturing.
So will we be able to move across these breakout rooms to share the...
Sorry, sorry guys, I need to get this. So where am I going to move, Brittany?
So if can you see my name on the list?
Not on the list of rooms because you're not in a breakout room.
I should be in number 5, I think.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So
Hang on.
just go assigned to room, breakout room.
Oh, unassigned. Okay. No, you're not in 5. Oh, I see. You are. So I move. Oh, okay, got it. Got it now. I'm on it. Right. Okay. So Brittany, you're 1. You're the first set of questions. I'm moving you now. I'm on a roll. Right. So then, Tristan, should we put you in room 2?
Yep.
So you were assigned to.
Yeah, I'll jump
You were
in.
assigned to 2. So just go and join 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Steve. So how are we going to cover 4 and 5? I'll take. Do you want to take, Steve? Do you want to take set questions 3 into room 3? Does that make sense? Actually, no. You're in room 4, Steve. So why don't you just go into room 4 and take questions? Take questions. Take the 3rd set of questions. Can't hear you, Steve. You're muted.
Sorry. So I'm allocated to room 3, right? So I can just
actually, you're allocated to 3, yeah. So
so I can drop it in there and then
you can come back out again if you want to. And we've not got many people in room 5, so I'm just going to move. There's a lot of people in room 1. I'm going to move you to room 5. Four, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 people in room 1. Oh, that's right. I've got 6 across, but it's because some people haven't joined. So, Nick, do you want to join a room?
Nick said in chat that he had to leave to do something else.
Okay. And then Nenad Bakaj, do you want to? You're not in a room. Would you like to move to a room? Okay, so we haven't got many people in room 5. I need another person in room 5 then. So I'll move Debbie. You're going to go to room 5. And then I'm going to drop in room 5 with the questions.
Cool. All right. And we'll hang here.
Join breakout 5, and I'll come back into room. And so I just need breakout room 4.
Hey, Tristan, are you back to drop into another room?
Yeah, do you need me to head into one in order to provide them with the questions? Because I'm just wary that, oh, so you just muted.
Oh, I think Glenn just did that.
No, it's me.
So,
Yeah, I've done it. I've all the rooms have got the questions now.
all right, excellent. So I'll just stay in breakout room 2.
Cool, all good.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thanks, Tristan. That's it. We're on.
Sorted, Glenn. Just take a moment to sometimes do that bits and pieces.
Yeah, it's good to, until you do it live the first time and work out what works and what doesn't work, you can get more efficient the next time.
Yep.
So yes.
Yeah.
Even just allocating someone to take the questions in the room beforehand would have just speeded that process up. It doesn't have to be a facilitator. It just needs to be someone with. Anyway, I'm mumbling to myself, Robin.
Yeah. You know what I do. I know this sounds like school.
Yeah.
But what I've taken to doing is putting the questions up on a slide.
Yeah. The thing is, here they've got different questions.
Yeah. They're saying these are all the questions. Then actually asking the audience to parrot some of them back, so that everyone knows. Yeah, it's difficult because essentially then you don't.
But yeah, there's 5 groups and 15 questions, so it was.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You got no. Yeah. All right. There's no hope of anyone remembering that many questions.
No. So yeah, it was. But I get it. Yeah, if they're all dealing with the same thing, that's a different.
Yeah, or even dealing with 2 things or 3 things, but 15 things, you're just not going to get there. Tristan, are you okay?
Does he come back out? Or is that a ghost?
He hasn't got his webcam on, which is the reason why it might be a ghost.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in one room. 1, 2, 3, 4 in a second room. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a third room. 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So just because Nick's not joined. 1, 2, 3, 4. I might move Shroofy. I'm gonna give Shroofy a surprise and move her. 1, 2. Can you still use the chat feature with it? Oh, you can still chat. You can still send chat to people in different. No, you can't. Okay, you have to be in the room to chat with them. Right, Dave McNair. Hi, Dave. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, Dave, we're just doing some breakout rooms. So people have got into rooms of 5 or 6 people and having a conversation around men and alcohol.
Okay.
You want to join one of the rooms?
Okay.
So I'll send you over to room 2 with Tristan, and he'll explain what's going on. So Robin, are you still there in the background?
Yes, I am.
So now, obviously, Dave isn't allocated because, oh no, he's there, he's unassigned. Got him. Just learning how to use this part of the technology. Dave, I've got you. You will suddenly disappear into a different room. There'll be about 5 or 6 people having a chat. Go and say hello and join the conversation.
Okay, thanks.
I think you have to accept the request I've just sent you on your screen, I think. Yeah, you're in. Three, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Right.
think Steve's final decision was to use chat for the summary bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I think it's low risk with this number of people as well.
Yeah.
No one else mentioning his name.
Hello.
Hi, Steve.
I just popped back in because I wasn't sure if we were leaving our group. But I will go back over there if we're happy to be spread out amongst those groups. I just wanted to check about the whiteboard versus the chat function or whatever you think.
Just talking about that.
Yeah.
We can entirely up to you. It's so we've never done it before. The challenge with the shared whiteboard is that you have to tell everyone how to use the technology.
Yeah, and my sense is I'm being recorded, so in the other group, I think there's not a great technological expertise. So the group I'm in, so I think probably it's best if we just leave it open to for people to chuck something into the chat if they want to under that.
Yeah. Now we could run a standard whiteboard where whilst people are doing that, I could copy and paste it and put it onto the whiteboard.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's a nice one then. Yeah.
So it's a sort of an in-between.
Yeah.
That
would be the old school butcher's paper style of
it
doing
is.
Right?
One facilitator at the front of the room capturing your notes. Yeah.
I can't. I'm going to be honest. I've never used that particular whiteboard, Glenn. You might find that people can actually put up theirs as well. So if there's some people in the room who can, it's maybe even say something, Stephen and Glenn. Then, if you've used this tool before, you're welcome to join in the whiteboarding.
Okay.
Yeah, could be a way of doing it.
See how it goes. There's definitely plenty of discussion. It's a small group. There's only 4 people in that group. A
couple of people didn't join. It just sort of fell that way.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. So is it
groups of 6 mostly? But yours was 5 with you.
I think there was a question in the chat that I really wanted to talk to, but I hadn't noticed it. So it's Nick Hansen, who seems to be here with us right now. See?
Robin, did Nick say he had to go?
Yeah,
yes, he had to go. So he just had to go. So
yeah, okay, no worries. Yeah, he raised the point about like how the enforced behaviour of shouts and stuff, and that is it's in the paper. Like it's an important point. Yeah. And it's interesting that the difference between the discourse of autonomy versus that everyone ends up conforming in some way or another is like those tensions are what we're trying to unravel. And I think he's onto something there. It doesn't mean peer pressure doesn't happen or isn't subtly powerful. And the notion of shout and rounds, we'd call it, I think. It works in a way where it does encourage people along, but in the data at least, there's this kind of like stressing on if you want to opt out of a shout that you can and should.
Yes. Melanie Cook's just joined us. Can you hear me, Melanie? Try again. Hi, Melanie, you just joined us. Can you hear me? Well, if Melanie can come through, I'll put her in group 3. So Steve, just remind me of the timing as well, because we need to.
So I don't know what time we started actually. Did anyone keep an eye on that? But we said we'd give them half an hour.
Okay.
But we might want to pull them back a bit earlier than that because there's a smaller. If they're smaller groups, then they're probably churning through everybody getting a chance to say something a bit more quickly.
Yeah. Okay. So we bring them. We can bring them back. If we say bring them back by 4, but if you're in the room and you sense it's sooner, pop out and say.
Yeah, I think probably before. Hey, I reckon. Let's give them another 5 minutes and then bring them back. I think I might pop back into that group because I think they're spending a lot of time talking around one issue in that group, which is fine. But yeah, I might give them a 5-minute warning, or should we say 5-2 to give it some kind of so 7 minutes from now.
Yeah. Okay. 5-2.
All right. Cool.
Yeah. I'll just drop a 5-minute warning into the general
Yeah.
chat thing that appears on everyone's screen
All right.
at 3:50.
Cool. I'm going to go back into that room then.
All right, and I'll send Melanie in there if she actually connects.
All right.
Melanie, Kirk, are you there? Cheers. Oh, I need to put you back in, don't I?
And
Oh no, you're in there. You can just go back in, can't you? I think. Yeah, you're in. Melanie Cook, are you there? Can you hear us?
Looks like she might not have her audio connected.
So you can ask to start video, but you can't ask to.
So let's start the audio, which is odd.
Yeah. She has been on before. I've seen that name. So, yes. So, Robin, breakout rooms. Let me just check. Hang on. Melanie Cook is unassigned. I might just assign her to a room and see if she goes in there. Room 3. So the way of doing the whiteboard for everyone is you open up a PowerPoint slide, right? Is that right?
So there's actually a whiteboard in here. 2 ways of doing it: the whiteboarding over the top of a PowerPoint slide, or you could actually put up a whiteboard script. You could put up a
So I put this whiteboard here.
yeah, that's what you. So and then that's interesting. As I said, I've never used this. I don't have rights to be able to do anything on that.
Okay, so then that is just my whiteboard, then, isn't it? And I just that is your whiteboard. Oh, who's done that? Someone's playing with my whiteboard.
Is that you, Bikram?
Legend.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You're a co-host. Where have you got to? Oh, okay. All right.
I co-hosted him just so that just so I could keep an eye on him.
Okay, so if you go up to the annotation tools, we can.
Okay.
Which then means, wonder if we put that down.
Then we could do that. We could do that very quickly because I'm just saying we're just going to use it as a normal whiteboard. But if you know how to do it, then join in. If not, put in the chat room.
Yeah, look, I think that's actually a reasonable line as well with a group.
Yeah.
Cool. Melanie's cloned herself, and we've got Bronwyn as well.
No, I've got some just joined. Hi, Bronwyn. So let me stop share. The only thing is it'd be good to be able to grab stuff from the chat box, but I can't. So I'm just going to move Bronwyn to a room. Bronwyn, can you hear us? Bronwyn, I'm just going to send you into a room. You're welcome to go there if you want and join the conversation. Assigned to which room? I'll send it to 3 as well. One of them might join. So 5 has got 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's got enough people in there. Right. Okay. The only thing is, I would, if I'm sharing that, I would quite like to be able to, when I share that, I can't see the message, the chat box, so I can't see what's in the chat box to share on there. So someone else needs to do that, don't they?
Oh, okay. So
someone else wants to grab what's in the chat box and pop it on here. I can't. Who's written that rubbish? Is that you, Bikram? I can't even get it off now, can I? Am I not even allowed to edit what you've done?
No, I have done this. I haven't done this.
You haven't done this?
No.
I can't get rid of it. Oh, I can. There we go.
Cool. So, have you got your toolbar across the top at the moment?
Yes.
If you go, yeah, you knew where I was going.
But I can't see the message box in there.
So you can't see if you go to the three dots at the end.
Oh, 3 dots more. I wonder if it's something to do with the breakout rooms being on or something.
3 dots at the end, and you should be able to then have options, get chat.
Options, and I got chat. Yeah, okay. Now, are you seeing that chat, or is it just me?
No, not seeing it.
So it's just me that's got it. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I could, for example, go in here and I could grab. So something like that, and then I can copy it on there. Oh no, I need text box, won't I? Ah, there we go. Yeah. Oh, that's easy. Okay. And then to get rid of that, hit again. Oh, how do I get rid of the bloody thing now?
Gone.
Oh, there we go. Usual way. Okay, so we've got the text bar there. We can open chat. Ah, confused again. Oh, there it is. There it is. Got it. Okay. Interesting. I do like a new challenge. Best way to learn is, oh, good grief. I said I was going to give them a warning. I haven't done that. I've been doing this. Okay, let me drop a warning in there. In 2 minutes. And I can't remember how I did it, but I did work out how to change the length of time that it takes the breakout rooms to close.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those. I always, in my own head, do a whole. It takes 2 or 3 minutes to get everyone in and out. Because people are slow to click on the buttons as well.
Yeah. Looks like Bronwyn has gone into that room. Good. I do. Say hello. I think Melanie's got a microphone now. Ah, Brittany's come back. You need to unmute yourself. People are leaving, so I'm going to close all rooms. We're coming out in 15 seconds. You'll come back muted, so. Everyone will start to return slowly, coming back into the room. Welcome back, everyone. Back from the mysterious black hole that you've just disappeared into. Okay, I think everyone's back in the room. I can just close that now. So, Steve, are you back with us? You need to unmute yourself, Steve, because you come back muted.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. So we were just chatting about the
Oh, have we lost Glenn?
The whiteboard, and we think we can do a combination of having the whiteboard. You hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I can hear my internet whirring in the background. I don't know what it's doing. But so just chatting with the production team, Steve, and we think we can just put up a whiteboard where people with the technical skills can actually write straight onto it. But if they can't, they can say stuff out loud, or we can grab stuff from the chat box. So we can do a little mix of both, if that works.
Yeah, I think that's fine. In the first instance, I think Tristan's going to lead this part, but in the first instance, I think we just want to get a vibe of what's going on in the groups. Certainly, I'm sure there'll be lots of interesting discussions, and the provocations, I think, drags people in lots of different directions. So, so Tristan, do you want to bring people back in and talk through what's happening next?
Yeah, certainly. So as was kind of discussed, if each person could, or each group rather, could elect their speaker to kind of summarize briefly, I guess, firstly, what your provocations were and some of the responses that emerged in response there. So I'm not sure, group one?
That was my group, and I took notes. Is it okay? I mean, is it okay if I'm the one that presents?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay. Only because I don't want to put anyone else on the spot. So our first provocation was the statement that when it comes to risky drinking, boys will be boys. Of course, this was a bit more of on the problematic side of things. So there was sort of a discussion around what this statement of boys will be boys, the kinds of permission-giving beliefs and the justifications that it can provide to probably more negative behaviours, and that is obviously not a great thing. But the majority of the conversation was that things are getting better, that culturally this is not as accepted anymore, and that there are sort of healthy cultures that are sort of counteracting sort of the drinking culture. I know Phoebe mentioned the healthy culture on the Gold Coast, even though it's an area where a lot of risky drinking happens. There's also, you know, Fitspo style, you know, I don't know, acai bowls, that kind of thing. So there's that kind of counterculture there, and also the counterculture from a gender perspective, where we're being more critical of these statements like boys will be boys. We did also mention, though, that in certain spaces, like especially on mine sites, where drinking every day is just a done thing, and where these kind of cultures maybe aren't experiencing as much of a positive change. Does anyone want to jump in there, or do you want me to keep going through the rest of them? Tristan, should I keep going?
Yeah, if you've addressed your 3.
That's just one.
That's just one. Yeah. Please continue to share.
So number 2 was the statement that the easiest way to get people to drink less is to tell them to drink less. Pretty universally, the answer was no. Paul mentioned that, you know, the statistic level data being presented to people as a way of discouraging them from drinking isn't as effective, but he's found that taking advantage of sort of personal sharing of negative health impacts is more powerful. And also the idea that maybe we can take advantage of this stealth care idea, and that you know, men are finding ways to enact care even within these barriers, or despite these barriers. And also the idea of bringing in taking advantage of that healthy discourse too that's going on in our culture at the moment, and maybe highlighting the positives of having a Sunday without a hangover could be a useful approach, rather than just that sort of paternalistic approach. And our 3rd was that men in white-collar professions drink differently to men in manual labour jobs. At first, we said no, that, you know, whether you're at a pub or a wine bar, you know, essentially similar outcomes. Knockoffs are sort of all the same, and they're pretty widely taken advantage of. But we also had sort of a counter argument that it is different. In some cases, the style of conversation will be different, the type of beverage will be different. And Paul mentioned that he's never known of a corporate workplace to give someone a slab of beer after the end of a project as sort of a congratulations. You're more likely to get a bottle of wine, and what kind of culture that brings about as well. We also mentioned the ideas around physical labor and hard yakka being sort of the idea that you earn your drinks, but also that in corporate settings, you know, the mental labor you do tends to give a sense of earning your drinks as well. So it was that one was a little bit less clear in our discussion.
Awesome. Would anyone like to respond to Brittany's summary there, or add to it? If not, we might move on to group 2. Did group 2 want to elect someone? I wrote some notes I'm happy to share otherwise. So Del, you're on mute, but I think that might have been an indication for me to go ahead with that one. Yeah, there's heads nodding. Okay, no worries. So our first provocation was that risky drinking affects only the individual doing the drinking. I interpret that as pretty broad consensus that there are sort of wider effects beyond the individual. We spoke of family violence, of course, a big one, and the role that alcohol might play in producing or shaping alcohol-related violence, and other forms of alcohol-related crime. Knock-on effects for family drinking. The discussion was heavily centered around families and drinking. So maybe the role modeling that a father's drinking can have in shaping a child's decision to, or rather a teen or their children's decision to engage in drinking. as well as its effects on family relationships and potentially sort of the mental health of the family. If you've got a sort of a father that's sort of known to, when he drinks, to come home and potentially be abusive, the repercussions of that for the family. So I'll move then to the second point. Risky drinking practices look different in different settings and subpopulations. We talked about a range of different sort of places where people engage in drinking, so sports venues, pubs, and the home, and the ways in which drinking might vary in different spaces due to various different forces. So sports, there might be sort of cultures of drinking in those environments around the sporting team, or sort of raising money as well. Economic factors were a big one in shaping drinking at home, so men might be likely to drink more in home spaces because it's cheaper as opposed to the pub. There was also some discussion around permissible spaces. So at lunchtime, you might be drinking, but not too heavily as well. And there was some mention there about a time when police would be drinking on duty as well. Maybe that culture's changed over time. So workplace drinking cultures and the specific spaces and places where that might happen. The third point then, masculinity plays a role in drinking related harms. And there's good discussion around sort of the shifting nature of masculinity and its relationship to drinking. So this understanding that maybe masculinity isn't static, it's not fixed, and over time, as it evolves or changes, so too will its relationship to men's drinking. In speaking sort of about the more contemporary environment as well, there was a sense of competition and men and this sort of role of asserting one's place in a hierarchy, and your drinking is bound up in asserting that role, as well as the provider role. I am able to provide, I earn an income, therefore I can afford to drink more and more heavily. So those were our three discussion points. I've gone through them quite quickly because we've got a few people to move through. I'm not sure if I missed anything from the group or whether the broader cohort here wants to contribute to that discussion. All right. Seems like everyone's on mute, but we'll move on to group number 3. So who was the spokesperson for group number 3? Do we have one?
I was in and out of that group, and I'm conscious of like having talked loads already, but I know I don't think necessarily the talk was structured around the provocations entirely, but one of the things that I would hope that someone in that group will speak to was the rural metro dimensions, and also the kind of I think this is something that most of the room will be veering towards anyway, was like the role and influence of a culture where alcohol is ubiquitous. So there were a couple of interesting issues that the group might want to bring to the attention of everyone else. They're still here. That's my group. So Martine and Bob made some interesting points. I don't know if they want to share.
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I think there was general consensus from our group that we felt there was inequity between rural and metropolitan areas, and some of that was to do with the general lack of services and choices that some rural areas have, the sorts of employment and occupations that are in some of those areas, the way alcohol is marketed to those communities and accessed by those communities, and the prevailing culture and lack of perhaps diversity and other opportunities, although maybe that's changing. And I think we felt that there was, in general, particularly Amanda, wasn't it, who was online from Brisbane, that there's a lack of support services in a lot of those places for people who might want to seek support for alcohol dependency and things like that. Certainly there's a prevailing culture, and often it's difficult for people to step away from that. We talked also about the choices of beverages and what might be available in those communities, and how alcohol is marketed to particular groups of men and people in those communities. I might hand over to you, Bob. Where's Bob?
think you're still set on mute, Bob.
Beg your pardon?
Yeah, Bob's on mute.
There we go.
Excuse me, I'm getting used to this. We're just addressing some of the marketing campaigns around a variety of alcohols, whether it was beer or wine or elite substances, but that the campaign was so strong and we wondered, what is the individual's kind of strength or coping mechanisms to be able to say no to that marketing campaign, as one. Item two is like, it's kind of a rites of passage, in my country, drinking is you got to hold your stuff, man. And it's like as good as a driver's license, but it's a fabric of our culture, which tends to overpower the individual to be able to say, no, I really don't want to go drinking tonight, or I'd rather do something else. So we talked a little bit about culture, coping, kind of what we call the manufacturing of consent, consumerism. In my country, people don't even call us citizens anymore. They call us consumers. We kind of follow the latest Madison Avenue, and it's created enormous addiction problems across the landscape of the U.S., urban and rural. So, and I guess lastly, I just say that it is a global issue, alcohol consumption. I mean, you can go to most cultures and you will see it as a viable part of ritual and ceremony, whether it's a wedding or it's a young woman coming of age in Mexico, or it's we're engulfed in it. I'll stop there.
Cool. Cheers, Bob. I'm not sure anyone else from group 3 want to contribute there, or we move to group 4, I think we're at.
I just wanted to say we did touch on was abstinence a good message, and I think we felt that probably not. I'm not sure that public health messages that abstinence is a great way to go, and certainly I can't imagine the marketing campaigns that would be used to try to get that. I think harm reduction and exploring with consumers themselves how, what is the language, what is the message that is going to resonate with people if we've got harmful levels of drinking. And when you look at how particular drinks and beverages are marketed to particular communities, and you look at drinking patterns, I was talking about fishermen, for example, and we were talking about that, going out to sea, coming back, and then heavy binge drinking sessions, or traditionally groups like shearers and things like that. So there's a lot of messages there about harm minimisation, but I'm not sure that abstinence is really the key. There's a lot of things out there in the rural communities that it's very difficult to generalise about, I think.
Great, thank you for the contribution. I think, given our time, Toast, we'll move on to group 4 now. Is there a spokesperson for group 4?
Yeah, hi, it's Andrew here speaking for group 4. So our questions were: drinking-related health risks are driven by Australian culture, not individually driven, I should say. So we had a bit of a mixed response about this, whether it was either or, but the consensus basically was a mixture of both. So we're saying that Australian culture has given us a lot of different pressures put on the individuals with, our lifestyle, our Australian icons, how we live our lives, our weather. All of these can be drivers for drinking behaviour. But we're also discussed that over the last several years, there's been more of a push for sort of individuals to make up their own minds and trying to counteract some of the destructive stuff with being responsible. So that's a key message we think is coming across in the community. Number 2 was drinking is pleasurable and brings social benefits. We thought that was probably a true statement because alcohol is designed to be pleasurable. People enjoy drinking it. I think we felt that if it's done in a way that's responsible and reasonable, then it does have social benefits because people like gathering together, and drinking is a bit of a social lubricant. It has that effect on our brains. Question 3, or statement 3, men's drinking practices affect wider relationships. And there was a resounding agreement with that. The question doesn't specify how much drinking, but we took it along the lines of risky drinking. So we know by all our stats in society that alcohol and drinking behaviour affects personal relationships. It can be a big factor in domestic violence. It can affect relationships at work, relationships, with the wider community. If if your behaviour is bad and you're doing things that are destructive, it'll affect all aspects of society. So that's what we came up with. Anyone from the group? Jared, John, Anne Marie, anyone else wanted to make a comment?
No, I think you covered it, Andrew. That was well done.
Great. Cheers for the summary, Andrew. I think we're up to the 5th and then final group. Do we have a spokesperson for group 5?
Yeah, I think I'm the spokesperson for group 5. All right, so our first provocation was, do men look after each other on a big night out and drinking? So obviously we learned about autonomy of men and probably a bit of a reluctance to really help each other out too much when they're out drinking. But we sort of discussed about that maybe when their mate loses autonomy. So if they're too drunk, I was saying they're falling into pot plants or they've gotten way too smashed, then there's that stealth care we talked of, where you're telling the bartender maybe to cut off your mate, make sure he doesn't have any more drinks, or getting them to have some water to try and sober them up a little bit quicker. So there is that care factor there, but not. They do largely let people look after themselves. Our second provocation was, should you use stats to persuade men to drink less? I think we talked around this a bit. There's discussions around maybe mixing stats with stories and showing I think we've seen TV ads where there's a mate on his night out and then he crashes his car because he's drink driving, and those stories are maybe more powerful in trying to change behaviour. But stats can be used as a backup. There was talk about men being more visual learners anyway, so just using stats and numbers may not be enough to persuade them into changing action. So I think our conclusion there was stats less and maybe more emotion and stories a bit more. Our final provocation was to who drinks more, or older drinkers or younger drinkers. And I think the consensus here was that younger drinkers might drink more on a single occasion, they might be more likely to drink 20 cans of alcohol on a single drinking session, but on probably a broader population level, I think we understand that older drinkers are drinking more and more regularly and heavily than younger drinkers, and that there are more younger people who are abstaining from alcohol too. I believe I've covered it. If anyone else from the group wants to add anything else.
Awesome. Well, that's the 5th and final group. Thanks everybody for your contributions to the discussion. I think it's quite an expansive collection of viewpoints, but also issues covered here. What we're kind of hoping to do with this next section of the workshop is to start thinking about how some of the conclusions we've drawn from our discussions might shape how we think about or approach Australian public health and policy. So do we have a sense here of, again, what the conclusions do in terms of thinking about intervening in men's drinking? And the ways in which we might structure this conversation, because it can open it quite broadly here, is to use the stop, start, continue approach. So to begin in thinking about the implications, what might public health and policy makers stop doing in some areas of shaping men's drinking?
I think, sorry, just to interrupt quickly at this stage, there might be someone that's going to jot some notes on a whiteboard as well, potentially. Yeah, there we go. Cool. But yeah, feel free to chip in. Like, what do we think that we should stop doing?
Well, just from an outsider point of view, what I have noticed here in Tasmania is that during the pandemic, there's only takeout and there's high influence to stay at home, but these bottle shops stay open. I mean, so what message is that? Stay at home and you can drink while you're at home. I think it's a mixed message.
So is that sort of thinking in terms of how you might shape alcohol store opening hours, or?
Store opening hours, and perhaps as a governmental policy, use this time to educate young people about alcohol or alcohol programs or the effects of alcohol, say pregnancy and alcohol usage, or you know, diabetes and alcohol, or its effects, you know, job performance, that kind of stuff. As a governmental policy, once again, I'm an outsider, so I'm just kind of throwing it out there. It's an information campaign, you know, to take this time in the pandemic and come out of it with a set of, you know, kind of stricter policies and greater education for all age groups, so that when Australians come out of it, maybe they will change their behavior. Maybe they won't go binge drinking. Maybe they will say no. Maybe they'll take an Uber. I don't know. I'll stop there. It's just an observation.
Thanks, Bob.
Martine here. I feel very strongly about the revenue that's accumulated from the sale of alcohol, particularly in New South Wales. I look at what's been done around the sale of cigarettes and how we've tried to separate. Well, there's so much revenue that comes to governments around Australia from the sale of alcohol that I think it really has to be something it has to be right across the board. We fund so much of our health services and health promotion units and all sorts of things from the sale of alcohol, that if we're going to seriously reduce, we want to reduce the amount of alcohol that's consumed, we have to do something about how the commercial players in the field are used, and how the money and the enormous amount of profit that comes from that.
Excellent, thank you. So is it alternative funding revenues? Are there any suggestions around how these public health programs, health promotion initiatives might be funded in lieu of?
Well, I just think if the government, if we're really serious about reducing the amount of alcohol that's consumed, that in turn will mean that there's a lot less revenue coming right around Australia to government. And are we ready for that? And how will we deal with it? And those things that were funded through the sale of alcohol are going to have to be funded through another means. So that has to be really considered, because there are so many vested interests in the alcohol industry that it's not going to be a simple process, I don't think.
Can I say something? Jared here. I just think that it's like anything else. If we educate younger people the dangers of excessive drinking, I'm thinking secondary school, say year 10 upwards, and also at university. There's a big drinking culture still at university. So, you know, a good marketing campaign on it's not cool to be drunk, or, you know, I've seen a lot of those sort of some of the billboards. It's so I think if we're going to sort of decrease antisocial behaviour as a result of excessive drinking, then we need to get that message through. And I don't know whether we're doing enough at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with you, but every week there are new lollipop products on the shelves. Every week there are these products that are so heavily marketed to young people and so easily accessible, and basically none of us here are probably going to drink things that taste like strawberry quick but have a punch, or those things that look like one of those slushy drinks that are actually on the bar in the pubs that are bright pink and bright blue. I mean, the industry knows exactly what they're doing, the way they package it, the way they present it to young women and young men, and absolutely nothing is done about that.
Yeah, I think that might speak to some of the challenges of influencing individual behavior through education campaigns in a context where alcohol and alcohol marketing is ubiquitous. I'm not sure if anyone has further points to contribute to that, maybe even speaking to an approach that focuses more on individual level education and swaying individual behaviors, say, for example, by informing people of the health risks of alcohol versus approaches like we mentioned earlier around, you know, curbing the times at which alcohol stores are open. Are those approaches at odds? Are they complementary?
If I could chime in with a kind of analysis or a parallel argument. In the US, the tobacco companies lost millions, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in their lawsuits against them that they fought for 25 years. And how they managed to pay those lawsuits, it was a massive class action, is they turned their view to Asia and to Europe and take the marketing campaigns to Asia to benefit once again. And they did. Smoking is way, way down in the US, but way, way, way up in Asia and also Europe. Point being is, I think we have to look at corporate interests and responsibility a little bit differently. Now, I'm not sure how you do that because they're just producing the alcohol, but the effects of the alcohol are so damaging, like tobacco was so damaging. I want to hold the corporations accountable. That's the short of it.
I think the conversation's kind of spanned across stop, start, and continue, but maybe we'll sort of enter into the start doing phase of the discussion if people don't have anything further to add around stop. What do we think then public health or policymakers ought to be doing in the space of men's risky drinking?
It's Andrew here. I think they one thing they could be doing is really encouraging some of these grassroots movements who are identifying, you know, some of these destructive behaviours and sort of rising up and doing something about it and challenging us all to change some of our drinking behaviours. So things like, you know, the October movement and Hello Sunday, having some of those promoted and maybe funded by governments.
And what needs do you think that specifically responds to? Sort of, is there an absence of these grassroots movements?
Yeah, I think so. If you're trying to change culture, then the most powerful way to do that is from the bottom up. So getting the residents or the citizens to identified that a change needs to be made, and then for them to start making that change, and then for governments to support them.
Are we all really happy with what the Australian government is doing at the moment in terms of alcohol? Is that is that the sense, or surely people have strong opinions about what we could be doing differently in this space?
The New South Wales government's got a lot of pushback for their supposedly closing Sydney down. No one's having fun in Sydney anymore, they say, because they can't drink till 5 a.m. Crazy.
Yeah, so the lockdown laws?
Yeah.
Certainly a contentious policy approach.
Not from me.
Do we agree? Do we disagree with the approach?
I totally agree with lockout after a certain hour, 1 or 2 or whatever it is.
And
I can chime in there if you want, Tristan.
Yeah, sure.
I was part of that movement from about 2002. Our state licensing committee here in New South Wales had been pushing for lockout laws for a very long time because of the amount of carnage that it would cause on the streets in between the locations. So it's definitely an effective means of keeping people in one space, but it does create a lot of problems outside the venue when people are trying to get in or when they're leaving. So there's just a whole lot of high risk behaviour that goes on.
And I guess a policy approach which has implications beyond directly shaping people's behaviours, but there were concerns raised around sort of just the general economic viability of the nightlife areas.
Yeah, like it just sort of, I mean, I think they had a really good reason to go as hard as they did. There were a lot of lives being lost and a lot of young lives. But yeah, I think it just needs to be tailored to, we were looking at individual areas rather than the general blanket, because we sort of knew the locations, you knew the pubs that were causing the trouble. There was a lot of cultural stuff or, customer profiling. So really it comes down to a lot of the stuff that the actual venue would have to put in place as well. But it's pretty hard to get them to negotiate.
Speaking of specific venues then, so there's a role to play in for example, pubs, nightclubs in introducing policies or
they have a
changes.
consultative committee. They basically have their own consultative committee that they have with all the stakeholders. So that includes all the frontliners, ambulance, police, anyone that's involved, like alcohol services and stuff like that, as well as venues. But there's it's all about viability and all about how much money they lose because of the lockout if they can't get those customers in on time.
It's Martine here. I wanted to make a comment about schoolies. That's a pretty big revenue earner around Australia, and even though supposedly these young people are, many of them under the legal age to drink, I mean, it's an enormous cultural issue, and it's kind of on the radar of young people from when they're in about year 9. They start but thinking about schoolies and booking their accommodation and all that sort of thing. So I guess they're potentially the drinkers for the next generation. And I know quite a lot of thought goes into managing all that kind of thing in Queensland and in other places that are hotspots for schoolies, but it really concerns me that whole phenomenon has really kind of grown up quite quickly over maybe the last, I don't know how many years, but I'm not quite sure that we're really doing very much to intervene there. It probably picks up on, he's not there now, but whoever spoke earlier about educating young people. But I think schoolies is a pretty big phenomenon in Australia now, which really sets people up for enormous binge drinking practices.
Can I just also chip in there? I was thinking about the way that, the data shows us that young people are less likely to drink now. Like they're drinking later, basically. And yet at the same time, there's a tension there because we definitely know there are subpopulations that do drink and drink heavily, and that schoolies and so on produces the kind of platform for that continuing behavior. And I think one of the things that somehow, and I don't have the answer to this, but one of the things that policymakers have got to get a grip on is the targeting of specific populations, because the general kind of discussion of young people drink too much or people in this profession drink too much doesn't quite seem to cut it for the vast majority of people that don't do that. So the specific subpopulation and groups within those subpopulations and settings, somehow they've got to be targeted in a more niche way, because I think otherwise the messages are falling flat. And yeah, it's a little bit, I can see it, hashtag not all men or whatever, but it's not quite like that, but there's something about that as well. There's something interesting and a dilemma that we need to tackle.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the discussion here, we've talked about, at least some of the policies that we've discussed here, is sort of education, lockdown, widespread education, lockdown laws. And there are a couple other that spoke quite truly universal approaches, and which is interesting because it's a men's health session, and the presentation at the beginning has focused on men's health and the relationship between masculinity and men's drinking. So in terms of, what do we start doing? Is there space there to consider approaches that approach men's drinking more explicitly and directly, or is it sort of the universal general approach that people seem to be advocating for?
There's a great point by Phoebe Watts in the chat. I don't know if Phoebe's still here, and it's not, she hasn't necessarily applied it to masculinity or men, but I think it's a really, really great point around campaigns that tell people what to start doing. So I think targeted campaigns around like telling men to start looking after their health, which is kind of what we're doing, but could be more of that, and to start a sport, to start feeling better, to be like strengths-based and future-focused rather than telling people what not to do, especially men, given that whole like entanglement of autonomy, I think is really powerful.
Do we want to build on that and specifically, I guess what or how we might work in the arena of men's drinking? We know that men are sort of disproportionately represented in drinking. They drink generally more and more excessively than women, and are often implicated at a higher rate in a range of alcohol-related harms, including alcohol-related violence. Sort of king hits or whatever it may be called. So does anyone want to respond to that, about these universalist approaches, when we have sort of a long-standing epidemiological evidence base that suggests men's disproportionate involvement in alcohol use and harms?
I'll start. Sorry, again, I just don't want to keep grabbing the floor, but it's reminding me again of what's in our data, but also beyond that men, again, maybe not as a group, as a whole group, but certain proportions, certain subpopulations of men have really poor understandings of risk. So I'm taken by that a lot of the attention is onto very problematic drinkers, which is really important, and I get that. But part of the bigger problem for us is a cultural one that sees a total misunderstanding, or a cultural one where alcohol is imbued in everything we do, and then a total misunderstanding of where the risk begins, and therefore not able, people need better information so they can make better decisions, because at the minute that message just isn't there. People do not think that if you have 5 or more, or 5 drinks in a session, men do not think that's risky, even though the evidence tells us that's when your risk for being hospitalized goes up exponentially.
Can I have a moment for a comment there, please? I work with men's groups, and one of the questions that hasn't been raised this afternoon is asking the question, what is the reason men drink? Not why, but what is the reason that they drink? And a lot of them always come to the men's groups that I facilitate to seek support, to seek some camaraderie without the use of alcohol. So we talk about the reasons they drink, and then substituting the drinking behavior with other behavior, i.e. I'm talking about men walking, talking and supporting each other, and just providing a safe place where they can come to support each other with some great skills and teaching them some skill sets. And with those skill sets, they build up an ability to problem solve and solve the issue, prevent the harm of alcohol abuse, prevent the domestic violence issues, prevent and reduce suicide rate, just by simply providing somewhere for men to come to share and support each other.
Yeah, that's great. It's a really good point, John. I love that. Yeah, there was, significant issue around that. Again, this was identified in our research that men don't necessarily know those other ways of connecting. Like, it has to be through alcohol, and that's a real problem, and that's something that we've got to confront. And it's a part of the culture, and it's a part of masculine norms within this culture as well that need to be challenged.
Any suggestions on how we might approach that in reshifting some of these masculine norms and values?
Discussion, further discussion.
I mean, it seems to be sort of a key driver.
I think they raised some really good issues yesterday, Tristan, in that sports one that you guys held, one of these, where they talked about how they're actually using a different approach of bringing them to the sports venues or the sports fields and engaging them that way. That seemed to open up a dialogue, and then they were introduced to those health professionals in that sort of safe, like half safe environment that they're comfortable in, rather than a clinic.
Yeah, so finding alternative platforms to engage people, but with the same sort of messaging around risks and harms, or about fundamentally reshaping how men connect with one another and the role of alcohol in that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's exactly what they were sort of discussing, just how to connect differently, but around the same topics, which was clearly sport and the issues that they were facing.
I think then we might then move on to the third and final portion of the exercise, which looks at what public health and policymakers might continue doing in efforts to influence men's drinking practices. So where are we doing well in that sense?
I think this is as much a chance to celebrate the efforts of yourselves and your colleagues as well. I think it's usually a nice way to end this stuff, rather than just thinking about the massive problem that we've got it's significant and we need to develop a response. It might be nice to close the discussion with thinking about what we do well or what we know others do well, and we should continue doing that and even replicate it elsewhere. So if anyone's got any stories of success for your own organizations, then feel free to share.
This certainly isn't my area, and it wasn't me that did this, but I think one really awesome thing that came out of the report was that drink driving across the board, there wasn't a single participant that in any way suggested that it was okay, and everyone had a very strong sense of responsibility for the community, and so that they would certainly step in if they knew anyone was going to drink drive. So that's, along with smoking, I think that's potentially one of the more effective public health campaigns we've had, at least at a cultural level. I'm not aware of the stats and if they're getting better, but that was a positive thing that came out of the research for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting how effective public health has been transforming the attitudes and the relationship between drinking and driving. Have we seen success like that in other domains of drinking?
I was going to say drinking amongst young people. So I'm sure men are included in that as well. So young people are drinking much less than they were in the past and ever have. So messages that you would think are getting through to reducing the up and coming drinkers and how much they're drinking.
Hey, it's Glenn. I want to chuck one in here, which is kind of sideways from drinking, but that whole thing that the main way that one of the main ways that men bond is through beer and sport. Well, one thing we're really seeing is a real explosion, and we had this on Saturday, a real explosion of grassroots men's mental health peer support groups. And they're set up by traders, ordinary blokes in their local area, getting together to do a man walk or to get together at a public barbecue. There's examples of these all over the country. So what that reflects is there's a willingness and an interest among a younger generation of men to create social bonds outside of alcohol settings.
Yeah, definitely. That's really reflected in Brittany's research, actually. Brittany's PhD is about men and friendships, and the implications for mental health there, I think, are massive. And the generational shift that we've seen points to some, a culmination of lots of people's good work in this space, where we see that young men are more likely to, engage in platonic hugging, whereas perhaps not that long ago, that would have been off the table completely. And actually social connection does have a physical connection component as well.
I mean, does that speak to kind of a shift in masculinity as well over time, and how that relates to drinking? If younger generations, is that to say that perhaps they have access to different forms or modes of masculinity that enable them to find connections outside of drinking?
I think many of us think so. One of the tensions there, of course, is but still stressing that domestic violence that's associated with masculinity and suicidality and all this kind of stuff is still they're really important. But what we see is this kind of a both and situation, where there are these potential transformations in masculinity that might be pointing us towards the kinds of social norms that we want, and then how do we promote those and amplify them and use those to combat the negative components of masculinity that leave men as being harm to themselves and others. I don't know what people think about that kind of stuff. Actually, I'm super conscious that we're well over time, and people are dropping off quite quickly now. No wonder, because we're 15 or 16 minutes over time. I don't know what you want to do, Glenn. Do you want to leave people in to keep the conversation? I think we're coming to an end anyway. But
it would be good if you sort of brought your part of the conversation to a formal close, and then people can sort of say their informal goodbyes if they want to stick around for a few minutes. I'll close down the whiteboard.
Yeah. I think, so I think that's pretty much all that we were going to do. And one of the things that we kind of knew coming into this conversation was that this wasn't about creating a solution or really having a conclusion as such. So what we wanted to end with was that bunch of thoughts and thinking put on a whiteboard. And what we might do is try and sift through that whiteboard as well and create some kind of infographic that might be useful as a summary of the conversation. So I don't really have too much to add now, and I don't know if Britt or Tristan, perhaps they want to say something, but they might not. And that's because we deliberately kind of wanted to leave it a bit open-ended. We want to thank everyone for their contributions, of course. It's been a very long discussion because we're now at 10 to 5. It's gone overran, and I think that speaks to people's interest. So I'm really pleased that people were able to stay around and chip in or even just listen. And the next step for us is, we'll look at that whiteboard and think about if there's a way of communicating that back. And again, it won't be solutions. It'll be thoughts and thinking for all of us to keep progressing in the same correct direction.
Great. Is there anything that Tristan and Brittany want to say to finish off before I wrap you up?
Thank you for everyone's contributions. That was really interesting. So
yeah, thanks all.
it's really nice to see that the research is hopefully going to have some impact in public health.
Right. So thank you, Steve and the team, for making today happen. Thanks for everyone who contributed. Thank you, as always, to our staff and volunteers for making this happen. We've got a couple of more things coming up this week. We've got a Boys Health Symposium at 12 noon tomorrow. And then on Friday morning, we'll be launching our report on male-friendly services and having some discussion with various men's health practitioners around some of the ways that we can make health services more accessible to men, which brings up the end of this week. And then next week it's Men's Health Week, and we'll be doing more stuff sort of public facing via Facebook. You'll be getting messages and emails about all this kind of stuff. If you've got a moment, I will try and actually I don't know if I've got access to it. No, it's a news. I was going to share the survey that we send out with you, but I've just realised I haven't got the week 2 link. I've only got the week 1 link, so I'll send an email tomorrow morning. Really welcome your feedback if you can just get a couple of minutes to respond to that. But I'll say thank you and goodbye to Steve, Tristan and Brittany. We'll keep the room open for a few more minutes if you just want to chat and reflect on that. I'll just say hello, but we will definitely close the room by 5 o'clock. So thanks once again, guys. It's been really interesting. I hope you've all enjoyed it. We'll save all the chat and there'll be a video of today so we can pass that on to the team to make sure they've captured and do whatever it is you academics do with butcher paper and notes and thoughts and conversations and ideas. Right, thank you all. But if you want to say want to say hello to me or say hello to each other, do stick around. I'm happy to have a quick chat. For example, John Soroti, you live like what 100 kilometers up the road from me, and you have to come on Zoom to see me. Hello, sir. It's been about a year or so since I saw you. Can't hear you, Jay. You're going to have to unmute yourself to say hello, John.
Yep, I got it there. Yeah, we're not far away. I'm coming down your way in a couple of weeks' time for camping trip, so we might pop in.
Excellent. We need the business, John, because we haven't got the people coming from New South Wales. So yeah, come and spend your money.
We'll be coming down. No, I just talked about some of the groups that I'm facilitating, and I've got one tonight. You know about the Insight Circle, which we're facilitating here in Gladstone.
Right.
It's also running in Brisbane. So we've got people from all around Australia come to that. The Man Walk I facilitate on Friday afternoon. And I've got guys from all over Australia that come to that. So I've had to shift that to a Thursday night for the men that comes from interstate. And then run this Friday afternoon, Friday evening Man Walk. So times are busy, but I just want to reiterate the fact that communication or discussion occurs where men are supporting each other and they come up with solutions rather than relying on alcohol.
Very good. No, it's a good point. I enjoyed that point. And yeah, it's a nice way to look at it. And great work you're doing. Building communities and relationships and empowering blokes. It's good to know you're still in the game.
I'm in the game professionally now because I'm working for a company up in Rocky.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. So I'm trying to build the base for them here in Gladstone. They're Australia-wide, but they're doing some aftercare work with suicide.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for your contributions. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good night, guys. I've got to get ready for the next meeting.
No dramas. Good night.